Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is KeruFaulhaber. I'm a vice president with Jobsfirst NYC, and Jobsfirst is a nonprofit intermediary that works to improve systems in New York City that can help people connect to economic opportunity. And we are joined today with a panel to discuss the green economy, and we're glad that you're interested in learning more about it. And we could really have no better stage setting than the recent President Biden jobs plan. I'm just going to share a little bit of information from that plan that relates to the green economy before we meet our panelists. So at the end of March, there was an announcement of Biden's $2 trillion American jobs plan, and it includes $100 billion in workforce training that will prioritize communities hit hardest by the pandemic and prioritize industry-based partnerships like the green economy as the mechanism through which workforce investments can reach targeted communities and populations. The plan calls for rebuilding American infrastructure and creating jobs. It provides $115 billion for repairing 10,000 bridges, modernizing 20,000 miles of highways and roads, and building 500,000 chargers for electric vehicles. It includes $100 billion for installing broadband across the country and $100 billion to strengthen our electrical grid, and it provides $213 billion to build affordable housing. It will increase support of social services and secure US supply chains and train Americans for jobs in this new economy while protecting workers' rights to organize. The plan addresses climate change and long-standing racial injustice, and it invests in technology to address the climate crisis and put the US at the forefront of clean energy technology and jobs. So it's a very good time to have an interest in the green economy that this plan will really help grow. And at this time, I would like to invite each of our panelists to tell those folks tuning in who you are, introduce yourselves and share your name, your job title, where you work, and in less than 60 seconds, tell your high school self what you do for a living. So first, I will call on the person to my left, who's Daphne Sanchez.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daphne Sanchez, she, her pronouns. I am the Executive Director of Kinetic Communities. The work that I do is working with homeowners and renters and helping them understand what does their energy consumption look like and how can they live in a home that's healthier and safer. My first high school job was through the Summer Youth Employment Program when I was 14 years old, and I had the opportunity to work with a councilwoman named Joules in Corona, Queens. And what we did was we educated renters about LED light bulbs. It was my first experience in the green sector.
Thank you, Daphne. And I will go clockwise to Alex Cassidy.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Alex Cassidy, and I'm a senior sustainability specialist for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And the way that I would describe my job is public administration. So what that means is I was interested in politics when I was younger, but decided that I wanted to focus more on the problem solving side of politics. So now I come up with policies and programs to kind of address modern needs and desires of the communities and come up with practical ways to solve those problems and implement new programs. And I primarily focus on sustainability and energy projects in the transportation sector.
Thank you, Alex. And Joanna?
Hello, everybody. It's nice to, well, we can't see you, but it's nice to have you seeing us. My name is Joanna Larson. I am my name is Joanna Larson. I'm the Director of Transitional Employment with the HOPE program, and I also oversee our social enterprise, which is called Intervine. The HOPE program is a nonprofit. We are sometimes referred to as a community-based organization because we work directly with community members. We help local job seekers connect to employment We give them training, we connect them to employment, and then we work with them to help them grow in their career. So we're all about putting together people who are looking for jobs and employers who are looking for employees. And we particularly focus, among all the areas that we do, we have a large focus on the green economy. So we are helping train people in horticulture, landscaping, green construction, green infrastructure maintenance. We're launching programs in HVAC and high energy efficiency. And we're looking at batteries and micromobility. So we're looking at, we're working now with people in what are currently jobs of today that are green, but also looking at the jobs of tomorrow that are going to be in the green economy.
Thank you, Joanna. And Mike.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, Mike Conway, Executive Director of Stack Joules. We're a nonprofit training program, computer programming, and Internet of Things, all in the building automation space. I describe how I do. I get to work with young people like yourselves, and we basically get to play and mess around with all sorts of gadgets, the gadgets that make building run. It's the technology side of energy efficiency. So it's the computerized systems and how you use computers to control all of the stuff that's in a building.
Thank you, Mike. And before we get to the next question, I had a follow-up question for Alex. If you could tell the young people listening a little bit about how policy connects to sustainability.
Yeah, of course. So I think that sustainability, it's really important to the way that people and animals and environments coexist. But in the world that we live in and in the country that we live in, it's not always prioritized because it's not always associated with profits or consumerism. So sometimes sustainability and environments can be harmed by modern economies and systems that we live in. So in response, people advocate for increased sustainability and environmental protection. And through our political system, we often legislate those changes, regulations, requirements to protect the environment, become more energy efficient, and just protect our water and our air quality, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So after laws are passed, they become policies, and those policies usually get passed on to governments and government groups that have to come up with programs and ways to implement those policies. So there's a lot of problem solving and a lot of ambiguity that comes after the law often. So we need people in this sector who can kind of think of ways to implement those policies and programs. And we often work with our private sector friends on coming up with those solutions as well. So there's a lot of technology that might be required or partnerships. So it's a lot of problem solving that comes from advocacy and just needs in the community.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. Thank you. And for the young people listening, they could think about local laws that you hear come out around, like greenhouse gas emissions, and even this new Biden plan. That's all connects back to policy and advocacy. So thank you, Alex. And Daphne, you touched on the next question, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more about not just what your first job out of high school was, and we'd love to hear from everybody because it's very interesting to learn the paths that people take to get to where they are. But what did your path look like to get to what you're doing now? And everyone could answer that question too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carrie. So I would say my path was very interesting because as I mentioned to you all, I started at SYEP at a very young age, really interested in kind of community, working with my community, working with people. And it wasn't until a couple of years of doing SYEP that I really started diving into like, what specifically do I like about this work? My family and I, we have a home in New York Beach in Staten Island. We actually were completely devastated by Hurricane Sandy. And it was a interesting time because I was learning about sustainability in school, but at that moment, I didn't know what to do. So I didn't know how to help my family. There was flood water. For those of you in Staten Island, remember, it was a very traumatic time. And so I took that moment and reflected back. We thankfully were rescued by boat. As many of you know, we Oakwood Beach and a lot of the South Shore and parts of the North Shore was completely submerged underwater. And so when we got rescued by boat and we were left on Highland Boulevard, one of the things that kept coming to my mind was, how can I make sure that this doesn't happen to other New Yorkers, to other Staten Islanders? How do we make sure that sustainability is front and center? So I started working with a nonprofit on the island that was supporting homeowners understand what's the structural integrity of their home. So is the home safe for people to return back? If not, what are the upgrades that have to happen if you have to rip out the walls, if you have to put down a new foundation, if you have to put in new windows and new insulation? And I was doing this specifically for bilingual communities on the island that didn't speak 100% English, and they required translation because a lot of the resources from the federal government and the state was only in English. And so not only was I serving as a technical translator, but I was also serving almost like a social service translator. So I continued down this pathway of working in different nonprofits and in different firms until I created Kinetic Communities, which is the organization that I work in now. And we work in the intersection of working with communities, helping them understand what is energy and their relationship to energy, and how do you make sure that the home we're living in is a safe and healthy and affordable home.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Daphne. Anyone else want to share their first job out of high school and what their path looked like to where they are now? Just jump on in.
I can jump in. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I was in high school. I don't think I would have necessarily thought that I would end up here. I grew up in a border town. And I grew up in San Diego in California. And so that experience was impactful for me in terms of seeing a lot of lack of equity and unsustainable practices in my community. And so I became interested when I was younger in wanting to get involved in helping to make the community that I live in more equitable, more fair for everybody. And when I got older and got into college, I also started to become more interested in the environmental aspects of what was going on. And it seemed to me that those two things are very tied together, that, a lot of the environmental issues come out of economic issues. So, for instance, when I was growing up, there was a whole big push about the rainforests in South America, and there was a big sort of awakening about this is happening, and the issue there is that if the people were the unsustainable practices were coming out of poverty. Were coming out of people who, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times it was coming out of people who were in poverty and were making decisions that maybe weren't the best long-term decisions, but were decisions that made sense for them in the short term because of their own short-term economic needs. And so I became really interested in this idea of the connection between economic equity and environmental equity, and environmental justice and economic justice. And I also got interested in this idea that, if you want to solve an economic problem, I thought to myself, well, it'd be helpful to understand that problem and understand how business works. And to be honest, the other thing that was happening when I graduated from college was that the economy wasn't very strong, similar to what's going on now. I wanted to work in a community-based organization. I wanted to work in a nonprofit, but honestly, I didn't have the skills to work for a nonprofit. Nonprofits tend to have small budgets, and they can't afford to hire someone who's doesn't bring skills to the table. And I didn't have a lot of skills when I was younger. So I went to work for business. I got a job in Wall Street, a very low entry-level assistant job, because again, I didn't know how to do much. And I had this idea that I would kill two birds with one stone. I would get a job that could pay the rent, and I would learn about business. And then I could bring those business skills to kind of community organizing, to community development when I actually got some skills. So I did that. I worked in business, first in financial services, then in marketing. I got a business degree, and then I switched into nonprofit work. And I started working with people who were doing the kind of work that I've been doing. And I've been doing this kind of work for over 15 years now, of helping connect people, job seekers, to employers. And I feel like it's beneficial to have been an employer, to have been on the business side, and to understand kind of what that looks like and what those, what those demands are, and sort of see it from both sides.
Thank you, Joanna, and you probably kind of lift up some ideas for young folks that they don't even think about, right? That working in nonprofit could also mean working in the green economy. And Mike, what about you? I know you have an interesting journey.
My first jobs were really the camp counselor in the summers, and I had a friend that had moved from Massachusetts, where I lived, to Colorado. And so I had this incredible opportunity when I was 15 to go out and work at a summer camp with him in the mountains of Colorado, and just loved it. And then took that and ended up doing that summers. That led into a career in education. I taught high school math for like 20 years, and a lot of different schools. But I think a common thing that I was wondering, like, how to make that classroom and learning experience more like summer camp, right? Where you actually like have a good time and can come out of it still learning what you need to learn and being in a position to get a good job and a well-paying job. And so the way I did that was by always connecting math to real world subjects. And so I connected with many people, and one really important person was my older brother, who's an engineer. And my best friend growing up, we best friends since second grade. And so he's in technology. He worked for Google, was a programmer. And so these things come together, and that's what started Joules. It's really a combination of making, this thing, computer programming and technology, which is often so like, not a lot of people are thinking that it's not for them or not accessible. But when you change how you do it, and you make it more of like gamification and able to be playing and exploring, you get access, and then connecting with professionals who are directly tied to careers. That's where I am.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in here because you said something that really resonated with me, is that sometimes people hear like where we're at today and they think it's a linear path, right? Like we grew up, we were born, we knew we wanted to be business owners and run software companies and training companies and work in agencies, but it's never that. Like I will say, like I started off my I went to high school in Queens, and I literally have spent my entire life within the 5 boroughs because I've jumped around borough to borough. And I went to college in Brooklyn, and I started off thinking I was going to medical school. And and when I started talking to some people that were in like med school, I was like, oh my gosh, I do not like the sight of blood. I do not want to deal with lawsuits. Like that's what my brain came up with. Because if you poke the wrong organ, like you just have a bloodbath. And so I quickly realized that was not for me. And I was in an engineering school, so I was able to explore other things, and I found civil engineering, and I really liked it. And so the combination of civil engineering with sustainable development in this institution that I went to was very unique at the time, and I wanted to explore it. So I switched, and I was like, I'm done with pre-med. Like I don't want to be a nurse. I don't want to be a doctor. I don't envision myself in a hospital, I think I would drive myself crazy. Some people will love it, but growing up in the boroughs, like there was a couple of options of jobs that you see. So like you see a teacher. My father is in law enforcement. My mom was a legal rep for small businesses. I have family members that were nurses and social care workers. So there's a very small pool of jobs that you see, but there's so many other things out there. It's okay to deviate. Like I have a friend right now who's in the energy sector, and she's actually studying computer science now. She's getting her second degree, and she's going to do a career change. And she's in her late 20s, early 30s. So it tends to happen. And there's someone else that I know that was in telecommunications, and he made a switch when he was 50 years old. So the career pathway for oneself is never a straight path. It can be for some people, but for most people, it is just a tentacle of decisions throughout life.
Thank you, Daphne. You read my mind. I was thinking the same thing when Mike was speaking and when each of you were speaking, right? And that's really why I wanted to ask that question of like your first job out of high school to where you are now. And even beyond, our path is not a straight path. And I spent the first 10 years of my career working in film and television. And I was just thinking, as each of us were explaining what we do now, that everything that each of us does is something that I didn't know existed when I was younger. And so it is interesting to think about how you get there. And with that in mind, and Alex, I know you didn't get to tell your full path, so maybe we'll start with you with this way of getting to that. If you think about what your journey to what you're doing now looked like, is there anything that you would have done differently to streamline that pathway and cut out some of the exploration or maybe missteps that you made? And we could start with Alex and kind of go around.
Sure, yeah. And I might bring a little bit of a different perspective here because I'm still early career myself. And I think that the journey to where I am now, every step really built on the last step. And you're at a really great age for starting that journey because you can really try anything. Something that I definitely recommend for young people is to start trying out internships right away because it's a really great way to sample different work environments, different fields, different topics. And you generally start somewhere probably unpaid, which can be difficult. When I started my career, I started with an unpaid internship, but I also had a paid job in food service, and I would kind of balance that. And it's tough, but those opportunities kind of give you what you need to put on your resume to build up and start working into paid work that's more aligned with your interests. And the more that you take those opportunities early on, the more they become available to you. And don't be afraid to try different things that sound interesting because a lot of skills do translate. And you can kind of learn how to express those skills to different employers and how to translate and apply them to different things. But trying as much as possible is great. When you're young, there are opportunities as students that you can try out. And once you get older and in your career, it takes a little bit more courage and more risk taking to try different things. You might have to leave something where you're getting paid and paying bills and try something different, and that's totally fine too. But it's really fun when you're young because that pressure isn't there, and it's really about learning. And people will, take you in and try to teach you what they know and they understand and remember being at that place in life. So I definitely recommend looking for and trying internships as much as you can fit them in.
Thank you. So anyone else want to jump in on tips to streamline getting to a place where you want to be in your career?
I would say don't feel nervous or worried to ask people that you don't know for advice. I think many times when you're growing up, there's like this sense of nervousness, or you might not know someone, so you might be hesitant to reach out. But I would say reach out. The worst that they can tell you is no, and that's it. But I would say most of the folks that I've met, like, they're very open to having a conversation and like talking about the work that they do one-on-one, and talking to you about what their companies or their organizations do. And I think it's also a good opportunity. It works two ways. One is that you're able to learn on that one-on-one conversation. And two, you're also developing a network of folks, so that when you are looking for a job or you are looking for an internship, you're able to have that relationship and say, hey, Carrie, I spoke to you a couple of weeks ago. I saw that there was an internship position. I would love to know if I'm a good candidate or not. And people for the most part are pretty honest and in providing feedback. So that would be my recommendation.
Thanks, Daphne. Joanna, Mike?
Sure. I agree with what everyone has said so far. And it was so interesting, Carrie, your question, because when I was thinking about it, I was thinking, I can't think of anything that I've done that I would want to cut out the learning that I gained from it. Mm-hmm. I mean, especially the mistakes. I mean, I feel like that's where you learn the most. Every job that I had that was boring, or, I was frustrating, you take something from that. You learn something from that. And of course, also from the ones that I enjoyed. So I think just doing as much, like grabbing at different opportunities. I completely agree with the idea of talking to people outside your network, inside your network. Sometimes, the people that we're most familiar with, we don't really get into, like, what does it mean what you do? What is it like to do what you do? What's unexpected about, was it what you do? And because I think it's those kind of learning about what's out there and developing that network. And then putting together all those, and then trying different things yourself, figuring out what you like and what you don't like. And then I think one of the things we've all been talking about is putting all those pieces together. And that's the kind of trick, is putting these things together that you learned in different places, making these connections, as Mike said, and then building something out of that fits you. And I think that is it's that zigzag path, a little bit like Goldilocks. You're going to try something, and then you're going to find the thing that's right for you. But I do think it always is a zigzaggy path, I think. And I think you learn everything from all the zigs and all the zags.
That's great advice. Mike, how about you?
I guess, like, where my mind went, and even in my as I was thinking about my early career, like, I didn't know what I wanted to do or where I was going or any of that, but I as I think back, I was pretty clear with myself around things I knew I didn't want. I don't know what that says about me, but so I knew I didn't want a cubicle. I didn't want to be sitting in a cubicle, right? I didn't want to be really sitting a whole lot all day. I wanted to be active. I knew that I really liked people, and so I wanted to be interacting with people. And I knew that it meant, like, I needed to care about what I was doing. Just making a doodad or something wasn't enough for me. And so within the parameters, I so, like everyone else is trying a lot of different things to see, like, well, how do I feel about this? Am I like sitting in a cubicle? Okay, forget it. I'm done. Or sort of measuring it off that, and that I think set up some guardrails for me that allowed me to progress through a lot of different jobs. I mean, I sold furniture at one point. I worked for a software firm. I worked in carpentry, and then ended up in education. So, but sort of thinking about what, I guess that might be a thought exercise, is like, is there anything that, like, you don't want to end up being or doing?
That's a good way to think about it. You're non-starters for a job. Like Daphne realized, I don't like blood. I cannot work in it.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that.
That is, it's easier than saying, probably what jobs do I like, to start with what do I not like. That's really helpful advice, everyone, and I agree. The mistake, you do learn the most from the mistakes. One piece of advice that I did get that I was thinking while you were all talking, that I probably wouldn't have really fully understood what it meant as a young person, but somebody once told me that you should constantly be developing your own board of directors, which are just kind of like mentors or people in your life that can guide you and that come with very different areas of expertise to help you along your path. Because career exploration is hard, right? Figuring out what you want to do, and there's just so much you don't know. To Daphne's point, like you usually understand the occupations of the people around you. So that said, let's get a little bit down to the nuts and bolts of the green economy and jobs in the green economy, and what young people, are tuning into this panel to learn about. And I really think some like just simplification of literally thinking about what are some of the jobs in this sector right now, and thinking about the investments that the current administration is trying to roll out. What does it look like long term? What are jobs in the future?
Well, I'd say there's two areas where I really don't think you can go wrong if you get any kind of training or experience in these two areas. And one is electricity. Anything, any training, any experience, any interaction with electricity, because it is it's the big shift. There's cars, you're right. It's like huge effort to switch cars to electricity, which isn't just the car. It's all the charging stations and the electrical grid. All of the components in there, and the other electricity is in everything, like electrifying buildings so that you don't have gas stoves, you don't have gas water heaters, you don't have gas. So electricity is just really key, right? That's the energy source. And then the other is technology, computer programming or working with technology. The combination of those two is a really, really powerful combination. And they don't have to come from an electrical engineering degree or an engineering degree or a computer science degree. These are such valuable skills that with some targeted training, you become instantly valuable in this economy. So it's a really, I'd say those two areas are two to look at.
And Mike, what does a specific job, like an entry point in electricity, look like? What's the job title? What am I researching if I want to study something or get training in something?
Well, so with Stacks and Joules, the entry-level job that we focus on is called a BAS technician. That's a build automation system technician. And it does deal with electricity because you are putting in sensors. So it's low voltage, but you are, you're twisting wires together to put sensors in, or sometimes they're battery, but you're putting temperature sensors, voltage meters, pressure meters, air, different types of air quality, measuring CO2. It's all sensors, and then connecting those to a computerized system to get the data so it can monitor it, and then using that and computers to control all of the motors and engines and valves and fans that are operating. So it's this building automation technician, which means you are generally means you're out in the field. You've got a lot of, like I say, like gadgets and tools that you've learned to use to measure electricity and other measures. And then you're connecting them both physically with wires and technologically. So you set them up on the computers and are able to get them to start operating on a computer.
Great. So it sounds like you definitely, people don't want to be in a cubicle like you, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's it. You're in a building, you're going around, you're chasing down, why is the temperature in that room so hot?
Great. What about others? Alex, any ideas from both the policy standpoint perspective and also I know you work for the New York, New Jersey Port Authority, and so any of the jobs there?
Yeah, I mean, I really do have to second Brian's comments because I mean, electrifying the transportation space is really a huge movement towards the future. And being an electrical engineer is extremely marketable in the green economy. Being an electrician is very marketable in the green economy. If you're doing installs for solar panels or electric vehicle chargers, that all deals with electricity. But even if you're in a role more similar to mine, where you're doing a lot more desktop research, talking to different stakeholders and companies, working with the facility managers to bring in some of these, off-grid electric technologies, you kind of have to be able to speak the language and understand and know, what you're talking about. So for example, the Port Authority has taken a strong interest into adding solar panels onto a lot of our facility buildings and bringing in EV charging for things like buses and cars. But there's not an unlimited amount of electrical capacity at certain buildings and on the grid in general that we all tap into for our electricity. So it's an important concept to integrate into any work that you do. But with that said, there are lots of management roles as well in this space. So some of the skills that I rely on in my job involve, analyzing data. That's very important. I would say that, if you're going to go on to college or even in high school, I, hope that some of these opportunities are offered as well. Try to work with data or research data analysis platforms like R, Stata. Those are really helpful skills. It's always good to be able to write well, be able to research and, use critical analysis. So, so those skills really help you kind of if you go into management or coordination or policy or public administration. But the hard skills are always a part of it. Engineering, there's also civil engineering, so that's not necessarily as focused on electrical, but building design is really big in the green economy. So architecture and civil engineering are really important. We work with civil engineers a lot at the Port Authority, and every time we design a new building and we're redeveloping the airports in the area, we want to know how can we make sure that the building has energy efficient lighting. We want to look at window design and make sure there's a lot of natural light. We want to look at our water systems. I mean, even things like we can harvest rainwater and use rainwater to flush toilets with instead of calling on fresh water that we could be drinking as people. So those kind of jobs exist in the technical space, but if you're in my position, again, which is a little bit more about management, you want to be able to understand those things and be aware of them and have that background as well to make decisions and consider how much money you have to pay for certain things and what's going to make the biggest impact and be able to evaluate that.
Thank you. And Daphne, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I will say there's also jobs that are in the middle with some site assessments and some paperwork. And so there is a lot of need for consultants and community organizers and working with nonprofits and private companies to help kind of put all these pieces together, because there's engineers, there's people that are lending and financing, so financiers, people that are doing underwriting, people that are doing construction and construction management, people that are doing programs and creating these grand ideas. And then you need someone to hold all of these pieces together. And so consultants and community organizers do this at different levels and different stages. And I will say in this industry, we know that the kind of average salaries tend to be higher than other industries. Mm-hmm. And then the educational requirements for being a consultant or community organizer for these types of projects can really vary. So it is a really good opportunity. You can definitely get your kind of foot in the ground with some of these organizations already, because they do have active internship opening opportunities. I know that there's the NYC Accelerator internship program. There's also a NYSERDA Clean Energy internship program. So there's a lot out there that can try to get you, if you're interested in that space. And I would say if you're ever working on a team project with other students in your class and you are the one kind of leading your team, then that might be a good career pathway to explore.
That's great. That's really great advice. And Joanna, I know you come at this from a slightly different angle maybe, but what are you seeing as jobs in the income?
Sure. And I think that, what I'll add to all of that is that also some of the industries that we don't think of as being green are becoming green. And so some of these new green jobs are not so new. It's just that people are doing things in new ways. So for instance, just working in construction is becoming green construction. As other people talked about, the buildings are being designed in a greener way. And it's helpful to understand, what about, kind of power, to help to understand and have an interest in, green construction, making buildings more sustainable, making them more environmentally friendly, can give you kind of an edge in terms of that. And so, but the starting point for there would be construction laborer. And that's kind of a starting point to get into that green construction business. Similarly, in terms of maintaining buildings and keeping them operating the way that they're intended to operate, using these great systems as Mike's talking about, following the policies that were talked about earlier, someone has to just monitor and make sure that they're working correctly and keep them going right. And that green building maintenance begins with, with janitorial and porter jobs. That's the kind of entryway into those positions, and that can grow into, being the building superintendent, to monitoring, like the systems manager, monitoring these systems, making sure they're working correctly. So you can get started in these fields and then layer in more training as you go to kind of grow in this direction. And again, as we talked about before, you may not know exactly where you want to go. So some of these starting positions, just the same way that I did, when you want to kill two birds with one stone, you need a job, you're not quite sure what you want to do, you want to learn in an area, just getting an entry-level position somewhere and then learning and growing from there can be a really effective way to do it. And I'll also just throw out, because I totally agree about the electricity, but on the other side, plants are something, and the green maintenance is something that we see becoming this idea of green infrastructure, is the idea of using horticulture as a way, as opposed to gray infrastructure. So you see, for instance, the tree pits around the city that have plants in them, they're not just decorative, they're there to absorb the rainwater. And that's solving a problem of rainwater runoff and sewage overflow that the system has. So that is actually a structural engineering issue that's being solved with plants. So there's all kinds of sort of different ways that you can get into this, from all different angles.
Yeah, so listening to all of you, it's clear that any job could be a job in the green economy, right? Just about. It ranges from urban farming to engineering and electricity, construction, and a whole slew of things we haven't even talked about, right? So I think we've kind of covered the ground of different types of jobs. I don't know if it's absolutely clear, like the path to get to those jobs or the education you would need to get there. So if there's maybe another recommendation or piece of advice of what a young person might study in addition to engineering and things like that, or any other really important final words that you'd like to leave our audience with today, I invite each of you to chime in.
As someone that studied engineering, I would say not every job needs engineering. I think every time people hear about the green sector, they're like, oh, you need to be an engineer in order to do this work. I will tell you, I was an engineer undergrad and I did not do well for undergrad. It was hard for me. It was very, very difficult. And there were certain skills that I actually learned in my high school of just like qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis that I was able to utilize in my college and in my career moving on. So I would say when you're looking at different career trajectories, there is a college track and there's a non-college track. So that's something also important to note, that you don't have to go into college to get a job in this space. And secondly, looking at other things that are not engineering, like urban planning or kind of United States history, is actually very important to understand like how the country was built and the infrastructure, and thinking about solutions that you'll be moving forward with. I also think that kind of business majors and finance majors are also equally as important, because we're talking about solar panels and we're talking about technology and controls. There's money all associated to that. Money is a very big factor of this. And if you know how to, and you learn how to use accounting and all these other degrees, it is very valuable. And then I would also encourage folks that are looking into the arts. It's important to communicate this through different platforms and different forms of media. And so a lot of times we focus on the STEM, but the arts are also equally as important, because we need to express this idea and express the change that's happening in our industry and the change that's happening in our world in different forms. And art is definitely an important form.
Thank you. And Alex?
Yeah, those are all great paths to take. Environmental science is also very important. There are a lot of jobs that involve actually testing. You know, if it's related to construction, you need to test groundwater, or even just evaluating the impact on the natural world that a lot of human activities have. That's very important as well. Still in the sciences, but a little bit more natural. Even, you know, careers like biology, you know, plastics are a really big problem in our natural environment today. And I think marine biologists play a big role in advocating for and understanding the impact that has on our oceans. Waste management as well, that's huge. Recycling is in a difficult place right now, I think, and we have a lot of stuff and a lot of garbage, and it leads to pollution. So that's another entryway. And I definitely agree with the arts. I think a lot of businesses have interest in marketing and designing and discussing what they're doing on sustainability. And I think there are paths for graphic designers and social media experts. And I think you guys are probably experts in social media already. And I think that once you start getting into the workforce, it's really going to impact, you know, how we understand what's going on in the world and politics with companies online and through social media. So yeah, there are a lot of ways to get into this industry.
Yeah, as everyone's talking about all of these different jobs and ways to get in, is I come back to some of the earlier comments around finding mentors and just how important people are, right? So think about as you're applying for jobs, as you're looking for jobs, getting a sense of how the people are. Are they mentors? Do they have a training program in the job, or are they just expecting you to show up and then leave? You know, so these are some considerations, and I would say, you know, if they're good people who are gonna be a mentor for you, and they have a system of training and moving you forward, it kind of doesn't matter what area it is. It could be in any one of these areas, because good people are going to help you move in the direction that you want to go, and they're going to help you figure that out, right? So it's think about the people and the feel of the organization that you're looking at.
Thank you, Mike. Good reminder.
And then I'll just kind of building on that, just come back to the real essential fundamental people skills that you have yourself, because that's so important. No matter what hard skills you have, if you don't get along with your coworkers, if you can't figure out a way to get along with that really tough customer, you're not going to go as far. but the person who gets along with that tough customer, can get along with all his coworkers, can, you know, deal with the people issues, because there's always people. Even no matter what the business is, you're always going to have to deal with people in some way, shape, or form. And so having those strong people skills can take you so far. And I would just also say, we see this again and again, and we hear this again and again from the employers we work with. Never underestimate the value of showing up every day on time, you know, where you're supposed to be and getting along with everybody. That you would not believe how far that goes. So don't forget about those fundamentals.
Joanna, thank you. And I want to thank each of you for sharing your personal journeys and your insight and words of wisdom for our audience today. And to the audience, I hope you found this discussion helpful as you begin to think about your future and your journey in your own career. And I also want Brian to share, I think he shared a link at the bottom there. Jobsfirst has been hosting a lot of conversations around the green economy and having wonderful people, some of the folks on the panel today, talk about their work in the green economy. And those videos are recorded, and you could see them at the link that Brian shared, some write-ups about them, and see the folks that have been speaking. So thank you all, or each of you, and it's been a pleasure learning more about what you're doing and hearing you advise our young audience.
It's great being a part of this. Great talking with you all.